One word, just one answer, and an entire empire crumbled forever. Rehoboam inherited the most powerful throne on earth, 12 tribes united under his authority, a legacy built by his father Solomon and consolidated by David before him. But he ignored sound advice and divided a kingdom forever. Have you ever stopped to think about how a single decision can change the course of millions of lives? How pride, disguised as strength, can destroy in minutes what took generations to build? In this video, you will discover the fatal mistake of Rehoboam, king of Judah. You will understand how the division of the kingdom of Israel did not begin with a war, but with a choice. And you will learn a biblical leadership lesson that resonates even today. There are times when listening is worth more than commanding. But listen, there's something I'm only going to reveal at the end. A truth about this story that completely changes how you see your own decisions. So stay until the end, because what's coming may transform the way you lead, choose, and live. Get ready. The story of Rehoboam begins now. Jerusalem was silent. It wasn't the ordinary silence of the night. It was the weight of an entire nation holding its breath. Solomon, the wisest king who ever lived, had died. And now in the streets, in the palaces, in the tents of the people, a question hung in the air. Who will be the next king? The answer was obvious. Rehoboam, son of Solomon. But the obvious doesn't always bring peace. The United Kingdom of Israel had been built with blood, sweat, and the anointing of God. David conquered. Solomon consolidated. And now, for the first time in decades, the future was uncertain. The people gazed at the empty throne with expectation. The elders whispered in the corridors. The young nobles sharpened their ambitions. Everything depended on a man who had never fought a battle, never conquered a city, never proven his worth before God or men. Rehoboam was about to inherit an empire, but the big question was he ready to rule it? The silence before the decision is always the heaviest, because it is in that silence that destiny can still be chosen. And Rehoboam's choice would change everything, forever. Rehoboam ascended the throne without shedding a drop of blood. There was no battle, there was no rivalry, there was no trial. He was Solomon's son, and that was enough. But perhaps that was precisely the problem, because an inherited throne doesn't always come with the wisdom to occupy it. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the scene. The great hall of the palace in Jerusalem. Cedar columns rise to the gold-covered ceiling. Sunlight streams in through the open windows, casting shadows on the polished marble floor. In the center, set upon ivory steps, stands the throne, empty, imposing, waiting. Rehoboam walks toward it. His footsteps echo in the silence. He wears royal robes, but inside, something wavers. He looks at the throne that belonged to his father and feels the weight of a legacy he did not build. Solomon built temples, David conquered giants, and he was merely born in the right palace. Rehoboam sits down. The crown is placed upon his head. Nobles bow. But within him there is a question that no one dares to ask aloud. Is being born king enough to know how to be king? The biblical story of Rehoboam teaches us something brutal. Authority without wisdom is like a sword in the hands of a child. It can impress, but it can also destroy. And Rehoboam was about to prove it in the worst possible way. It didn't take long for the first test to arrive. The people gathered at Shechem. It was not a rebellion. It was a plea, an appeal, a last chance to avert disaster. They sent representatives to Rehoboam with a simple but meaningful message. Your father made our yoke heavy. Now, lighten the harsh servitude and the heavy yoke you imposed on us, and we will serve you. Think carefully about what was happening. The people weren't rejecting Rehoboam. They were asking him to be different. Solomon had built magnificent temples, dazzling palaces, impenetrable fortresses. But all of this came at a price. Crushing taxes, forced labor, a yoke that weighed heavily on the people's backs. Now, with a new king, there was hope. Perhaps Rehoboam would be more compassionate. Perhaps he would understand that a strong kingdom is not made only of gold and precious stones, but of loyal hearts. Perhaps he would listen. This was the decisive moment. The decision that would divide a kingdom was about to be made. But first, Rehoboam did something that seemed wise. He asked for 3 days to think, and he said, "Come back to me after 3 days." 3 days, 72 hours. Enough time to seek advice, enough time to change history, but also enough time to make the biggest mistake of your life. Political conflict in the Bible rarely begins with swords. It begins with deafness. And Rehoboam was about to prove it. Rehoboam made the right choice, at least at first. He sought out the elders, men who had served his father Solomon, men who knew the inner workings of power, who had seen kingdoms rise and fall, who understood the hearts of the people because they had lived among them for decades. And their answer was direct, simple, powerful. If today you become a servant to these people and serve them and answer them with kind words, they will be your servants forever. Let me translate this for you. The elders of Israel were saying, Rehoboam, leadership isn't about dominating, it's about serving. If you lighten their load now, you'll gain their loyalty forever. But if you tighten it even further, you'll lose everything. This was the way, clear, illuminated, time-tested. Lessons in biblical leadership that could have kept the kingdom united, prosperous, and strong. The counsel of the elders was not weakness. It was strategy. It was wisdom. It was the voice of experience speaking truth to power. And here, just a minute, I want to ask you something. If this story is touching you, if it makes sense to you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episodes. Because there are many powerful stories coming soon. Returning to the story, Rehoboam listened to the elders, but listening doesn't mean obeying. And what he did next sealed the fate of a nation. Because there's something more dangerous than ignoring good advice. It's pretending you're listening and then doing the exact opposite. Rehoboam left the meeting with the elders, and he went straight to consult his friends, young nobles, men his own age, guys who grew up with him in the palace, who never went hungry, who never carried a stone, who never felt the weight of the yoke that the people were carrying. And Rehoboam's question was the same. What advice do you give me to answer these people? Their response was completely different and completely disastrous. My father made your yoke heavier, but I will make it even heavier. My father chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scorpions. Listen to this arrogance, this pride disguised as strength. Rehoboam's young advisors thought that demonstrating power was more important than winning hearts. They thought that crushing the people's request would show who was in charge. They thought that fear breeds loyalty. They were wrong, tragically wrong. The sin of pride in leadership is always the same. Confusing authority with tyranny, thinking that shouting louder means being stronger, that punishing more means being more respected. But the Bible teaches the opposite. Pride goes before destruction. Proverbs 16:18. And Rehoboam was about to put that verse to the test. He had two voices in his head. The voice of experience, which said, serve and you shall be served, and the voice of pride, which said, crush and you shall be feared. Which one do you think he chose? Which one would you choose? 3 days have passed. The people returned to Shechem. The streets were full. There was expectation in the air. Perhaps, just perhaps, the new king would be different. Perhaps he had listened to the right advice. Perhaps there was hope. Rehoboam stood up before the crowd and opened his mouth, and with those words he destroyed everything. My father made your yoke heavy, but I will make it even heavier. My father chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scorpions. Silence, a piercing silence, then murmurs, then indignation, then fury. Rehoboam had made his choice. He rejected the ignored counsel in the Bible that could have saved his kingdom. He chose pride instead of humility, strength instead of compassion, fear instead of love. And the consequence was immediate. Wrong decisions in the Bible never come alone. They carry a price. Sometimes that price is paid for generations. And in Rehoboam's case, the price was the greatest political and spiritual division in Israel's history. He had the opportunity to unite. He chose to divide. He had the chance to serve. He chose to dominate. He had wisdom within his reach, and he threw it away. Failed leadership in the Bible always begins with a choice, and Rehoboam's choice had just broken a kingdom. Words have power, they build empires, and they destroy nations. And on that day in Shechem, Rehoboam's words did just that. They shattered what generations had built. When the people heard the king's reply, the reaction was unanimous. What share do we have in David? We have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel. Now take care of your own house, O David. It was like a spiritual earthquake. In seconds, loyalty evaporated. Unity crumbled. The United Kingdom of Israel, which had withstood invasions, wars, and crises, was torn apart from within, not by a sword, by a word. Rehoboam tried to send Adoram, the tax collector, to calm the people, but it was too late. They stoned Adoram to death, and Rehoboam fled to Jerusalem in despair, realizing too late the magnitude of what he had done. The consequences of biblical arrogance are irreversible. You can repent, you can cry, you can try to fix things. But some choices leave marks that time cannot erase, and Rehoboam's mark was etched in history, forever. The kingdom, forever divided, was not the result of an external war. It was the result of an internal war, between wisdom and pride, between listening and commanding, between serving and dominating, and Rehoboam chose the wrong side. While Rehoboam was fleeing, another name emerged, Jeroboam, a man Solomon had tried to kill, a leader who had taken refuge in Egypt, a man the people saw as an alternative. And now, with the kingdom fractured, he has returned. The 10 northern tribes gathered together and proclaimed, Jeroboam will be our king. And so the division of Israel and Judah was realized. 2 nations where before there was one. 2 kings where before there was one throne. 2 histories where before there was one purpose. Jeroboam and Rehoboam. 2 men, 2 kingdoms, and a division that would last for centuries. Rehoboam was left with Judah and Benjamin in the south, 2 tribes, Jerusalem, the temple, but a weakened, humiliated, diminished kingdom. Jeroboam was left with the 10 northern tribes, the majority of the people, the largest part of the territory, but also something dangerous, the need to create an identity separate from Jerusalem, and that's where Jeroboam made his own fatal mistake. He built golden calves and said to the people, These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Idolatry, turning away from God, spiritual rebellion. The fall of the United Kingdom of Israel was not merely political, it was spiritual. 2 kings, 2 mistakes, and a people who would pay the price for generations. The division wasn't temporary, it was permanent. From that day forward, Israel was never united again. The northern kingdom and the southern kingdom lived as rivals, sometimes in fragile peace, sometimes in open war, but always separated. The people paid the price, families divided, trade disrupted, civil wars, weakening in the face of enemies, Assyria, Babylon, empires that saw the division and took advantage of the weakness. In 722 BC, the northern kingdom was destroyed by Assyria, 10 tribes scattered, lost to history. In 586 BC, the southern kingdom was conquered by Babylon. Jerusalem was destroyed, the temple was burned, the people were taken into exile. It all started with a decision, a word, a wrong choice at the wrong time. Biblical disobedience and its consequences are never small. They spread, they grow, they contaminate. And in Rehoboam's case, they contaminated an entire nation. The political conflict in the Bible teaches us something harsh but true. Leaders bear responsibilities that extend beyond themselves. When a king makes poor choices, a people suffers. When a leader ignores wisdom, generations pay the price, and Rehoboam's price was extremely high. Rehoboam continued to reign, but about what? 2 tribes, a diminished territory, a kingdom that was a shadow of what his grandfather David conquered and his father Solomon built. He tried to gather an army. He wanted to reconquer the north by force. But God sent the prophet Shemaiah with a message: "Do not go up or fight against your brothers. Return each to your home, for this comes from me." And Rehoboam obeyed. Too late. He listened to God after he had already lost everything. The biblical story of Rehoboam is the story of a man who lost before he could rule, who inherited an empire and delivered ruin, who had wisdom at his fingertips and chose folly. But here's the point: he wasn't just a bad king. He was an example, a warning, a living lesson that flawed leadership in the Bible always begins in the heart. Rehoboam didn't fail because he was weak. He failed because he was proud. He didn't fail because he was young. He failed because he didn't want to learn. He didn't fail because he lacked advice. He failed because he ignored the right advice. And that's the tragedy. He had everything going for him, and he threw it all away. The Bible doesn't hide the mistakes of its characters. It exposes them, not to humiliate, but to teach. And Rehoboam's mistake continues to teach us even today. The story of Rehoboam is not just about an ancient king. It's about you, about me, about everyone who has ever had to make an important decision, about every leader, father, mother, student, professional who has ever had to choose between the easy path and the right path. The lessons of biblical leadership are timeless, and Rehoboam's lesson is clear. Listening to the right advice at the right time can define the destiny of many, not just those who lead. How many times do we ignore the voice of experience because we think we know more? How many times do we choose pride over humility? How many times do we prefer to appear strong rather than be wise? Rehoboam teaches us that true power lies not in dominating, but in serving. True strength lies not in crushing, but in listening. True leadership lies not in instilling fear, but in winning hearts. And when we make the wrong choice, the consequences never come alone. They multiply. They affect others. They leave marks. But here is the hope. We are not Rehoboam. We still have time. We can still listen. We can still choose wisdom over pride, humility over arrogance, God's counsel over the voice of ego. Proverbs 11:14 says, "Where there is no guidance, a people falls, but in an abundance of counselors there is safety." Rehoboam had wise advisors. He chose fools, and he paid the price. You have God's counsel. You have the word. You have wisdom at your fingertips. The question is, are you going to listen? And here's what I promised to reveal at the end. The division of the kingdom of Israel was not an accident. It was permitted by God. Why? Because Solomon, Rehoboam's father, had turned away from God. He worshipped idols. He married pagan women who led his heart astray. And God had said, "Therefore, I will surely tear the kingdom from you and give it to your servant." So Rehoboam's mistake was real, but it was also part of a larger plan, a judgment, a consequence of generations of disobedience. This doesn't absolve Rehoboam of responsibility, but it teaches us something profound. Our choices have roots, and often we reap what our parents sowed, or we sow what our children will reap. Therefore, every decision matters. Every piece of advice we hear or ignore carries weight. Every moment of pride or humility defines who we will become. Rehoboam ignored sound advice and divided a kingdom forever. But you don't have to repeat his mistake. Now I want to hear from you. What advice have you been ignoring? What voice of wisdom have you failed to listen to? Leave it in the comments. Let's talk about it. If this story touched you, please share this video, because there's someone out there who needs to hear this today. Someone who is about to make an important decision, and perhaps this story can change the course of that person's life. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and keep following these transformative stories. Because the Bible isn't just ancient history, it's living wisdom, and it speaks directly to you today. May God bless you, and may you always have ears to hear the right advice at the right time. Until the next story.